For this Brown Park presentation, I'm going to do it on John Jarvie and his family. John Jarvie was born in Scotland in 1844, came to America in 1865. He first lived in Rock Springs, where he ran a bar. In 1880, at age 36, he married Nellie Barr. They came to Browns Park to live. He had a store in Browns Park. He also had a ferry that went across the river, and also he did a lot of mining in Browns Park. Hi, I'm Charlie Wardle. I'm author of two books, one called Browns Park Haunted History, and one called John Jarvie from his journals he wrote. Also, I've been studying Browns Park history for many years.
John Jarvie was killed July 6, 1909. For this presentation, we're going to learn about this man and his family. John Jarvie is called Old John, the Rocky Mountain student, the wizard of the hills and the river. What made John Jarvie such a remarkable man? We'll learn about John Jarvie's wife, Nellie, what happened to his four boys after his death, and why did his sons leave home and work for other ranches in the valley? And what happened to his ranch after his death? John Jarvie in Scotland. John Jarvie was born February 13, 1844, to Archibald Jarvie and Agnes Watson Jarvie in Scotland. In John Jarvie's journal, he says his birthday was February 13th. John's parents were married in 1843. His family consists of John, who is the oldest, then James was born in 1846, and Archibald 1848, William in 1850, and a sister, Ephelium, if I say that right, 1852, then Christina is 1855, then Alexander, his youngest brother, 1860. Now there's a picture of John Jarvie's mother with his three brothers and his cousin, who was raised by his mother. But from left to right on that, we have Alex, who is sitting down. Then Archibald is in the back. Then his mother, Agnes. Then his cousin, Ethel. Then his brother, James. Lived in Scotland. In the 1851 census, John is listed as 7 years old and as a scholar, meaning he was going to school. And then 1861 census, John is listed as 17 as an ironstone miner, so he was working in a mine when he was 17. John's education in Scotland. In his journal in 1890, when John sends his two oldest boys to school in Rock Springs, Wyoming, he wrote that he did go to school until he was 9 years old. Also in his journal, in 1877, John states that he was a Mason from the Masonic Lodge in Scotland, which probably consisted of more education when he was older. Now this picture here is from the Jarvie family collection. It is taken in Scotland, and it could be of John or it's one of his brothers, but it is a family picture though. More family pictures that were taken in Scotland of John Jarvie's brothers. The very first one on the far left, I've seen that identified as John Jarvie, but it is actually taken in the 1890s in Scotland. And the two other pictures are also taken in Scotland, possibly of John Jarvie's brother. All these pictures come from the Jarvie family collection. John Jarvie's mothers and sisters. The first one is of a young girl, possibly John Jarvie's sister Ephelium. Then we got John Jarvie's sister Christina. Then Christina married James Leard, and there's a picture of her family there. And from left to right, we got William, then James standing in the back. Christina is sitting, and next to Christina is her daughter Agnes. then you got her husband James, then Archie. Then there's a picture of John Jarvie's mother with his cousin Ethel that was raised by John Jarvie's mother. All the pictures come from the Jarvie family collection. Coming to America. A family story tells that John started working in the mine at a young age. One day, the foreman became upset with John's work and gave him a severe beating. They said he actually was beaten with the handle of a pick. After the beating, John did not return to the mine. He stowed away on a ship heading for America. In the 1900 census, it says that John came to America in 1865. In January 6 of 1865, John's younger sister, Ephelium, dies at the age of 12. Then on March 9th, 1865, John's dad, Archibald, dies at the age of 45. According to a letter John's mother wrote, John and his mother had an argument when John left for America. Now there's a possible picture of John's dad there, and also a picture of John's sister, Euphemia. These pictures come in the Jarvie family collection. They're both taken in Scotland, and the reason why I think that one is Euphemia because the flowers placed around it for maybe somebody that had passed away.
John Jarvie arriving in Rock Springs, Wyoming. I have not found John Jarvie's name on any ship list coming to America. Also, when he first arrived in America, where did he live? What did he do? Did he work? Did he go to school? Or did he do both? John Jarvie appears on the Rock Springs census in 1870, 5 years after he came to America. The story is told in the Cheyenne newspaper that he, John Jarvie, was taking the train to California to mine gold. When on the train, he heard about the Diamond Mountain and decided to get off the train at Rocky Point to mine diamonds. The Diamond Mountain story ended up being a big hoax. Diamond Mountain diamonds were salted. That means somebody stuck them there, and the same people kept on finding them. And John Jarvie ended up in Rock Springs. Now here's a newspaper article from the Cheyenne Sun, March 2nd, 1890, and it's a big long article talking about the fake diamonds, great diamond fake at Diamond Mountain. But in it, John Jarvie does have a quote. They quote him, "I never passed through Point of the Rocks without calling to mind the first time I struck this God-forsaken country. It was just 17 years ago. I was on my way to California from New York. When I got into Wyoming, I found everybody talking about the wonderful diamonds fields, and that had just been discovered, about 60 miles south of the Point of the Rock." Rock Springs, Wyoming. In 1870 census lists John Jarvie as 26 years old, running a bar in Rock Springs. He was living with 4 other Scotsman immigrants. In 1873, John Jarvie won the election, 318 to 204 over J.W. Stillman to be superintendent of Sweetwater County. In 1875, John's bar burns down. And also, John Jarvie becomes a U.S. citizen in 1875, and on October 8th of 1875, John buys the Willie Wall Saloon from William Wall. And in 1879, John wrote in his journal several times that he wanted to join Thomas Edison to be an inventor or a renter. Now, I have the census here, listed John Jarvie as being a bartender. Also, I have the Cheyenne Daily Leader that talks about the election of the superintendent with John Jarvie won. Then Salt Lake Herald Republican talks about John Jarvie's bar burning down. That's May 9th, 1875.
John Jarvie's journal. John Jarvie's journal was found in 2002 by his great-granddaughter Carol Jarvie Gardner. The journal was in the shed with Thomas Jarvie stuff, which included a full album. Thomas Jarvie is actually John Jarvie's second son. In November of 1878, John decided to start writing a journal to improve his penmanship. Now, this is actually the first page of his journal. He writes at Rock Springs on November 26, 1878, and he shows his penmanship. He had very nice penmanship. John's dream of the future. On January 14th, 1879, John writes in his journal about a dream of the future. In the dream, everyone has a flying machine called the flying car. Now, cars were not invented until 1886, 7 years after this dream. And the first airplane flew in 1903, 14 years after this dream. In John Jarvie's dream, every house roof were designed to have a landing area for the flying car, with an elevator from the roof to the house. John writes about the clothing, the homes, and how dinner was served in his dream. In his dream, he writes about an automatic bread slicer. And there's a picture of the dream. He writes in about 4 or 5 pages about this dream, and he just said this is just a dream when he started writing this. John's letter and picture from his mother, Agnes Jarvie. On June 2nd and on June 5th, 1879, John writes in his journal a letter he received from his mother, Agnes Jarvie. The letter upsets John, and he writes several side notes about his mother. It seemed that John's mother was over-religious. At times told John, when he was younger, that she was going to try to beat the devil out of him. There's a picture of John's mother. And the other picture I already showed that once before of John's brothers and mother and cousin. These pictures actually come from the John Jarvie family collection. Nellie Barr. Nellie was born July 25th, 1855 in Scotland to Thomas and Margaret Barr, the same town that John was born in. Nellie had one older brother, James, 1852, and 6 younger siblings. Margaret, born in 1857, Samuel, 1861, Sarah, 1863, Sadie, 1865, Robert, 1868, and Annie, 1875. Annie was actually born in America. And the 1900 census list, 1873, shows that the Barr family came to America. They first lived in Pennsylvania before going west in 1879. However, Nellie's sister Margaret Barr Spargo lists in the 1900 census as coming to America in 1870. In the Rock Springs, Wyoming census in 1880, Nellie is born with Anna Brown and her children. Anna Brown was also from Scotland, and also in the 1880 Ogden census, Nellie's mom and dad and siblings are living in Ogden, Utah. Nellie Barr's possible trip to India. Sometime before Nellie and John were married, Nellie made a trip to India. While in India, she possibly acquired a trunk. A family member today still has the trunk. Documentation of Nellie's trip to England has not been located. However, the design and artifacts and part of the trunk make the trip to India very possibility. And there's some pictures of the trunk there, outside and inside the trunk that the family has. Barr family pictures. These pictures come from the John Jarvie collection. They're labeled the Barr family. A lot of them were taken in Pennsylvania and some in Scotland, and then a couple in Ogden. First picture on the far left is Nellie's mom with one of her daughters. I believe the daughter is actually Sadie. taken in Philadelphia. Now, next to that could have Nellie's dad, but not 100% sure that picture is taken in Scotland. Then we have a lot of other pictures of Nellie's brother and sisters. The one on the very far right on the bottom, I believe, is actually Nellie with her sister Margaret with her grandmother Ellen Gray. That picture was taken in Scotland. Courting Nellie Barr. When John met Nellie in about December of 1879, he writes up a marriage contract, much like a business contract. I don't know if he ever gave it to Nellie or anything, but he wrote it up and it's in his journal. John writes in his journal that Nellie is more like a brother to him. This actually upsets Nellie. In April of 1880, John writes in his journal that every night he walks Nellie's home. And there's a possible picture of Nellie taken in Philadelphia. John and Nellie's marriage. On June 17, 1880, Nellie and John get a marriage certificate in Rock Springs, Wyoming. In John's journal, he says they were married on June 19, 1880. Nellie was 22 years old. She would be 23 on July 25th, and John was 36-year-old. He just turned 36 on February 13th. There's a picture of the marriage certificate, and know that Margaret Barr was actually one of the witnesses getting the marriage certificate. Nellie Jarvie becomes a U.S. citizen. On November 2nd, 1880, after Nellie and John were married, Nellie receives her U.S. citizenship. She applied for the U.S. citizenship in the territory of Wyoming, and there's a picture there of her citizenship. Nellie and John moved to Brown Park. According to John Jarvie's journal, he came to Brown Park 3 months before Nellie. During those 3 months, John was likely building a dugout. Nellie came to Browns Park in November of 1880. She may attend her sister's Margaret's wedding in Ogden, Utah, prior to traveling to their new home in Browns Park. They lived in a 2-room dugout the first winter in Browns Park. John describes the dugout in his journal. The front of the dugout, he says, was a sitting room. It also could have been used as a store. They lived in the back part space of the dugout. On January 11, 1881, John writes in his journal that his hair is growing long and white. Living in the dugout did not go well. Nellie and John never felt well living there. Nellie was also pregnant. His writing gives evidence that the dugout was damp, musty, and food quickly became moldy. And there's a couple pictures of the dugout that's been restored, but it's the same location, the original dugout. John becomes the postmaster for Browns Park. On March 21st, 1881, John writes that he traveled to Ashley, Utah, to be sworn in as the postmaster of Browns Park. Actually, today is actually Vernal. It is said by accusation of Jarvie that he liked to read postcards, newspapers, and items that came in the mail, even items that were not addressed to him. John's position as postmaster only lasted a few years. He quit in a silent protest when he was asked by his superior to check up on suspicious wrongdoings of fellow postmaster. Nellie Barr Jarvie. Nellie had a beautiful singing voice, and she also would entertain people in Browns Park with her singing voice. Nellie seemed not completely healthy much of the time. John even mentions it in his writing in his journal when he's courting Nellie. Minnie Krause stated in her interview in 1990 that Nellie had a temper. Now, one thing, when Nellie died, Minnie was only 8 years old. In 2025, I found this caramel type setting near the dugout. It looks a lot like the one that Nellie is wearing in this picture. And there's a picture of the setting, and Nellie
But this picture comes from the John Jarvie family collection.
Birth of their first son, John Don Jarvie Jr. Prior to John Don Jarvie Jr.'s birth, Nellie traveled to Ogden, Utah, so Nellie's mother could help take care of Nellie and the newborn baby. It's not sure John went there, but he probably did. They would have traveled by wagon from Browns Park to Rock Springs and by train to Ogden. John Don Jarvie Jr. was born on July 5th, 1881. In Thomas' obituary, he mentioned that Thomas was educated in Browns Park and Ogden. Thomas was one of Nellie's and John's son, so it can be assumed that John Don was educated in the same manner. Now, there's a picture here of one of the Jarvies taken in Ogden. It's not labeled which one it is, but possibly it could be John Jarvie Jr. when he was going to school there in Ogden. Thomas Jarvie, born August 19, 1883 in Browns Park, naming after his mutual grandfather Thomas Barr. Thomas had his mother's dark hair. Now there's a couple pictures here of Thomas, one of Thomas on a horse. Thomas loved to wrangle wild horses, and he actually would catch the wild horses and sell them to the army. There's also a picture of Thomas when he was going to school in Ogden, Utah. Archibald Jarvie, born March 14, 1886 in Ogden, Utah. So Nellie actually went to Ogden, Utah for Archibald's birth, and John could have also gone with him. Archibald was named after his grandpa, Archibald Jarvie, John's dad, who died in 1865. Archibald worked as a miner. Archibald served in the Army during World War I. There's a picture of Archibald when he's going to high school in Ogden, Utah, and also a picture of Archibald when he joined the Army. James Jarvie, born August 20th, 1887 in Browns Park. James is probably named after Nellie's brother James Barr, who died December 23rd, 1876 in Ogden, Utah. Now this picture here is of one of the Jarvie boys taken in Rock Springs. We just don't know which one it was. It could have been John Jr., Thomas, Archibald, or James. John's store, Ferry and Ranch. Even though the closest store to the Jarvie store was about 70 miles away, he had one of the finest stores, tried to provide the best for his customers and was competitive with other stores. John ran a post office in Browns Park from 1881 to 1887. He quit the post office when he was asked to spy on the Burnham postmaster. John loved visiting with his neighbors and customers. At times, he would read the bumps on people's heads. Technology claims that bumps on a person's head were linked to specific aspects of their personality. The ferry was the only crossing of the Green River for about 100 miles, unless you wanted to swim across it. If customers couldn't pay cash to use the ferry, they would trade goods to pay the crossing fee. Indian crossing about a half mile upstream that people could cross when the river was low. Wagon roads were on each side of the river. On the north side, the wagon road went down the hillside where the power lines are today. On the south side, the road went up Taylor's Flat towards Sears Canyon. There is also a road coming down Red Creek Canyon. There's a picture of John Jarvie's store that's been restored, and a couple pictures on the wagon road, one coming down the hillside and the other one going up to Taylor's Flat. Stonehouse and Corey. In 1890, John Jarvie paid Judge Jake Bennett and possibly Pat Johnson to build the Stonehouse. The quarry where they cut the stone was east of John Jarvie's place at the bottom of Ewing Canyon. There were also two wooden additions onto the west side of the stone house. Maybe some of the Jarvie's boys or guests stayed in the stone house. There's a picture of the quarry there, and also a picture of the stone house with the two additions onto it. Sadie's Bar's death. When James Jarvie was born, Nellie's sister Sadie came from Ogden to help her. While Sadie was helping her sister, she became sick with what was diagnosed as the Bright disease, which is a kidney disease. Nellie and Sadie's mother was also on her way to Browns Park when she received word of Sadie's death on Sunday, September 25th, 1887, while on her way to the Jarvie's place. Sadie could have been the first white woman to die in Browns Park. Sadie's body was taken to Ogden to be buried in the Ogden, Utah cemetery. There's a newspaper article there of the Sadie's funeral, and talking about her mother getting the word as she's coming to Browns Park. And there's a picture of Sadie and a picture of her headstone in the Ogden cemetery. Sadie Barr was an opera singer. She sang in Ogden at the Union Station Opera House. I found 3 newspaper articles with her name in there, that she was part of the opera, Miss Chester, the Willow's Corpse, and the Game to the Last. All Sadie was in those casts. And there's a picture there of one of the casts. Sadie, I believe, is on the bottom on the left. Nellie Barr Jarvie's death. About 2.5 years after Sadie's death, Nellie became sick with tuberculosis, bleeding from the lungs. Nellie died on May 9th, 1890, but in John Jarvie Journal, he actually said that she died on May 5th. Minnie Krause says that Nellie died in the bedroom of the Jarvie house as Minnie's aunt, Jenny Law, was holding her. Nellie was buried in Ogden next to her sister Sadie. There's an empty spot in between her and Sadie. There's a picture of Nellie and a picture of the newspaper with her desk, and a picture of her gravestone in Ogden. Raising the 4 boys by himself. After Nellie's death, John never remarried. He raised the 4 boys by himself. He did their cooking, he made their clothes, and even educated them. But he also did send them to school in Rock Springs and in Ogden. He raised his boys while still running his business. John did miss his wife. After she died, he left everything of hers just as he left it. Now there's a newspaper article called The Rocky Mountain Student, which John had a column for that, and he did several writings for the Rock Springs Miner, titled The Rocky Mountain Student. And this one actually introduces John Jarvie as the Rocky Mountain Student, and talks about him running his store in Browns Park, being one of his finest stores around, and raising his 4 boys. That comes to the Rock Spring Miner, May 18th, 1892. John Jarvie's brother and nephew comes to visit. Since John had left his homeland of Scotland, he has not seen any of his family. The family members probably wrote back and forth to each other, but in 1894, John's brother comes to visit, and he also brought his son with him. It just does not tell us which brother it was. The article says that his brother was from Montreal, Canada. And this article is written in the Rock Springs Miner, January 25th, 1894, and also Charlie Krause was the one that drove him to Browns Park.
John Jarvie was an educated man that enjoyed writing. John didn't have a school or college degree, but he was an educated person who was mostly homeschooled or self-taught. From 1892 to 1896, John had a column
in the Rock Spring newspaper called the Rocky Mountain Student. When Mary Krause died on January 31st, 1904, John Jarvie wrote a poem for her funeral. The poem is posted at the Jarvie Ranch and is read at the end of the Jarvie video, which is showed to visitors at the ranch. There's a couple newspaper articles talking about John Jarvie, the Rocky Mountain Student, and the post of the poem. John Jarvie's store was broken into and items were stolen during 1895. In 1895, John locked up his store and went on a trip to Rock Springs, Wyoming with his sons. While they were gone, someone broke into the store and stole clothing, several guns, and about $100 worth of merchandise. This is the newspaper article that reported the theft. It comes from Rock Springs Miner, May 30th, 1895. Raising the four boys. After Nellie's death, John raised the four boys mostly on his own. He cared for them, even made their clothing for them on a Singer foot pedal sewing machine. Minnie Krause said that John was so good at using the sewing machine they could even sew a button with them. It appears that sometimes the boys would attend school in Ogden, Utah, or Rock Springs, Wyoming. When they did this, they would stay with other people. All the four boys would live with John in 1900, according to the UN Census. On the Rock County Census in 1900, John Jarvie Jr. is listed as living in Rock County as a ranch hand. 1900 could be the year that John Jarvie Jr. left home at the age of 19. There's a picture of a sewing machine we have in the dugout, and also this 1900 census. Story of the Jarvie boys. They would get goose eggs and put them in with their chickens' eggs for the hens to sit on. One hen has 3 gooselings. One gender that they raised for 3 years became the chief of the barnyard. The boys learned blacksmithing skills from their dad, and they liked to build things in the blacksmith shop. In 1900, when taking a group across the ferry, they saw a grizzly bear come over the hill. One of the Jarvie boys gave chase with a cowboy that had roped the bear. The bear was pulling the cowboy and the horse until someone shot the bear dead. The Jarvie boy had a good laugh watching it all. One time a group of boys went over to Henry Hurdle's place and they got him drunk and they put him in a buggy and drive around. And he actually fell out of the buggy and was being pulled from it. And John Jarvie Jr. stayed with him until he was healed. There's a newspaper article of the grizzly with the pulling the rope into the arms of a grizzly. That comes from Rocky Mountain News, June 26, 1900. And then there's also a story about the boys. Some group came there. The dad was not home, but the boys helped him out, took him across the ferry, and showed him around Jarvie's place. By 1902, all John Jarvie's sons had left home. John Jarvie wrote John Jarvie Jr. a letter on May 28th of 1902, stating that he's surprised he was when all of his sons had left home. The sons did feel that they could earn more money working for other people than working for their dad. James would have been 15 in 1902. He did go off to school to Rock Springs, but he didn't stay there. Ended up working at a ranch in Browns Park. In 1903, John wrote his son Thomas a letter saying that he is still lonely, but enjoyed when one of his sons would come and visit. In September 1903, one of the sons became sick
with typhoid fever, and John took care of him. The doctor was called from Vernal. There's the one of the letters that John Jarvie wrote to John Jarvie Jr., the first page of the letter, and also the newspaper reporting that one of the boys getting typhoid fever. John Jarvie's mining. When John was younger in Scotland, he worked in a mine. John studied geology and the layout of the land in order to find a good mining area. John and his partner became owners of the copper mine called the Bonandine Mine at Douglas Mountain in Colorado. The mine had copper, but the problem was the transportation of the ore to the railroad in Rock Springs, Wyoming, by wagon. The mine was high on Douglas Mountain range and could only be worked during the summer. John ended up losing a great deal of money in his mining adventure. There's a picture of me and my wife at the kilns in Greystone, Colorado, used for the Bonandine Mine, and there's a newspaper article about the Bonandine Mine from the Salt Lake Herald-Republican, July 27, 1897. John Jarvie accidents. John was hurt in several accidents while mining or being thrown from a horse. One time in a mining, a large boulder fell on John, hitting his head, and he was not expected to live. Another time in a mine, John lost his footing and fell 25 feet down a shaft. One time while John was inspecting a mine in the Red Creek area, he was thrown from his horse, breaking several ribs. Minnie Cross tells of how she helped John remove the bandages around his body, and John wore a woman girdle until his hips were healed. And there's some newspaper articles, one about the rock hitting him and falling and hitting him, and one about him falling 25 feet, another one about him being thrown from the horse and breaking some ribs. John Jarvie, robbery and murder. On July 6, 1909, one day after John Jarvie's Jr. birthday, John Jarvie had two visitors come visit him at the ranch. Their names was George Hood and Bill McKinley. John knew George. George had worked for him in the past and also worked for the Kendalls and the Willem sheep ranch. John fixed the man's dinner, but the dinner was never eaten. George and Bill decided to rob John. At gunpoint, they made John open his safe in the store. The safe had a $100 bill and a revolver. After the robbery, John shut the safe and tried to get away. Made it out of the store and is heading towards the blacksmith shop and footbridge. One of the robbers shot John in the back between the shoulders, and John fell face down near the footbridge. John was shot a second time in the back of the head. John's body was dragged towards the river and placed in a boat. John was tied into the boat, and the boat was sent downriver. The man robbed the store, taking everything they could carry with them on John's own horse. There's a plaque we have at the Jarvie Ranch that explains the murder. The next day, John Don Jarvie Jr. sent Johnny Law to his dad's store for supplies. Johnny came back and told John Jarvie Jr. that the place was a disaster. He could not find it. His father, John Jarvie. John Jarvie Jr. went to his dad's ranch with Johnny Law. They found the store and the house had been ransacked. They also found a puddle of blood and the trail of blood and clumps of hair going from the bridge around the stone house towards the river. John Jarvie's boat and horse were missing. Minnie Cross also had to come at Jarvie Place to return a book she had borrowed. She also saw the trail of blood and the traces of white hair on the ground. Also, James Jarvie came to the place and saw all the blood, and he went over to the Taylor's place to get a gun to go look for the killers. I'm not sure which one found the murder scene first, James or Johnny Law. There's a newspaper article about the robbery and the killers. It comes from the Salt Lake Herald, July 9th, 1909.
Two murderers left on foot leading John Jarvie's horse packed with stolen goods. At the base of Ewing Canyon, they must have become tired of walking and loaded the horse to ride double towards Rock Springs. A posse was formed to track the killers. The murderers knew that they were being tracked, so they created a fake camp. What appeared to be two men sleeping. From a distance, the posse discovered the campsite and decided to wait until morning to apprehend the criminals. When the posse came into the campsite, they found two dummy clothes in bloody clothing that had been worn when Jarvie was killed. About 30 miles outside Rock Springs, Jarvie's horse gave out and the killers continued on foot. The criminals arrived in Rock Springs late at night and checked into a hotel. They required an early morning wake-up call. The posse arrived early in the morning in Rock Springs but had a hard time finding the sheriff. Once they had found the sheriff, the killers had boarded the train and left Rock Springs, headed east. A couple of newspaper articles about chasing the killers. The first one at the Rock Courier, July 15th, 1909, mentions George Hood, who was a man that worked at Willing Ranch for a while and also lived for a time at John Jarvie's ranch, so he knew the store layout very well. The other one is about John Jarvie Jr. chasing the killers all the way to Kemmer, Wyoming, before losing their trail. That's Rocky Mountain News, July 22nd, 1909. John Jarvie's body found. On July 14th, 1909, Archibald Jarvie found his dad's body 25 miles downriver. His body was still tied to the boat. The boat was upside down and caught in the willows by a J.S. Hoy ranch. A group of about 25 gathered to retrieve Jarvie's body from the river. Crawford McKnight, a witness to the recovery, says the corpse was so badly disfigured the body was swollen and wouldn't fit into the coffin they had. Herb Bassett had to make a bigger coffin to bury John in. John Jarvie was buried at the Ladore Cemetery, and there's a newspaper article about recovering the body, and that comes from the Vernal Express, July 23rd, 1909, and there's a picture of John Jarvie's grave at the Ladore Cemetery. The ranch after John Jarvie was murdered. After his dad's death, the four boys cared for the ranch for a while. The store was never reopened again and was torn down. Material were used to build a new building near the ferry. In 1925, the Jarvie Ranch was sold to Charlie Sparks. In 1940, Bill Allen was running the Jarvie Ranch. A fire burned down the building by the ferry. Mrs. Allen's wedding dress was in the building and was lost in the fire. You can see evidence of the fire on the ferry pole. And there's a picture of the ferry there when the Taylor family was using it. It's a picture called the Taylor's Ferry, and there's a picture of the rebuilt Jarvie store and the ferry pole that shows that the fire went through there. Part of it's all black. James Jarvie murder accident. It is said that James tracked his father's killers to the East Coast and back to the West. 1910 census has James living in Sweetwater County. In February of 1917, in Butte, Montana, James was getting close to finding the murderers. The killers broke into James' hotel room and threw or pushed James out a second-story floor window. James broke his neck from the fall and died. Investigators were told that James was rolling a cigarette and lost his balance, which is why he fell out of the window backwards. He was 30 years old. There's a newspaper article that goes over there, James being killed, and it's also ruled as an accident. He was just rolling a cigarette, and also his death card that was caused it'd be an accident. Then the 1910 Wyoming Sweetwater County census has James' name on it. Archibald Jarvie killed in a mine accident. In the 1910 census, Archibald Jarvie was living in Cody, Princeton, and Sweetwater, Wyoming County as a cattle herder. Archibald joined the U.S. Army. He served in France during World War I. According to the 1920 census, he was stationed at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, part of a motor transportation repair unit. On August 3, 1924, Archibald was working in a mining accident when his pick struck some dynamite, and he was killed from the explosion. He was 38 years old. There's a newspaper article reporting the mining accident from the Rocky Mountain News, August 15, 1924, and his death certificate. There's a couple of pictures of Archibald in the Army, and there's down the bottom is the Texas El Paso census has Archibald living in Texas El Paso. John Jarvie's killers almost captured. In 1935, a former Undersheriff George Stevenson was riding a train from Denver to Green River, Wyoming. As he was riding the train, he was discussing the history of Browns Park with the Italian man sitting near him. As they discussed John Jarvie murder, the Italian man said he worked with a man on the South Pacific Railroad in Sparks, Nevada, that used to brag about getting away with a robbery and murder in Browns Park. Stevens investigated the story and concluded that this was one of John Jarvie's murderers. Stevens approached Thomas Jarvie, the only son living in the area, and asked him if he wanted him to pursue the murder. Thomas said no. Too much time has passed since his dad's murder and too many bad memories. Besides, Thomas had lost a dad and two brothers. John Jarvie killers were never caught. There's a picture there of John Jarvie. John Don Jarvie Jr. John Jarvie Jr. stayed in Browns Park most of his life. On June 25, 1913, John married Olie May Miles in Burnham. Olie was also from Browns Park. John and Olie had 4 children together, 3 girls and 1 boy. Hazel, 1916, Margaret in 1918, Ethel in 1921, and John in 1923. John worked on a crew that installed a telephone line into Browns Park. In 1916, he dislocated his knee on the job. John also worked as secretary of the District Number 1 in Moffat County. John's wife Olie died in 1936 and buried in Vernal, Utah. In his later years of life, John moved to San Bernardino, California. John died in 1955 at age 74. There's John's World War I draft card, and also his marriage license there, Olie and John. And John dislocated his knee in a fall putting the line in. Then John's death in San Bernardino Sunset News, September 13, 1955. Thomas Jarvie. Thomas Jarvie married Elisa Flitch, September 6, 1917, in Green River, Wyoming. Elisa and Thomas had 6 children: Archie, 1919, Pamela, 1921, Ruth, 1922, Nellie, 1924, and Douglas, 1927, and Aranzo, he went by Hunk, 1913. Thomas' World War II draft card mentioned that he had a bullet scar in his right leg. The family has no idea how he had a bullet scar and how it got there. Thomas died May 18th, 1974 in Rock Springs, Wyoming at the age of 91. There's his, I got a copy of his obituary there for his funeral, and his World War I draft card and his World War II draft card, which mentioned the bullet scar in his right leg. Jarvie graves in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Thomas and Archibald are listed being buried in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Archibald's grave is not marked, but is listed as being next to Thomas. Thomas's grave is just marked with a stone and a mark that says Tom on it. Also, a couple of Thomas's sons are listed there. Archie Jarvie, he died in a car accident in 1956, and Alonzo Luke Jarvie, he died in 2017, and his wife is also buried next to him. That brings the end of this presentation about John Jarvie and his family. I do have 2 books about Browns Park Haunted History, and one about John Jarvie from his journals. You can purchase those books from me at charlieworld34@gmail.com. They're also available on amazon.com. Thank you for going through this presentation with me.